Hello, Raj.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, good.
It was good last night, wasn't it?
It was amazing.
Yeah, it was.
They were brilliant.
Yeah, I thought they honoured you beautifully with their poem.
They overwhelmed me. Oh.
Yes.
Have you seen them before?
No, I haven't.
Right,
No,
right.
no.
Oh, they were amazing.
They really made theatre sports, I mean, off the cuff stuff.
Yeah. Just totally, like, their entire bodies were animated.
Yeah, exactly, the whole. And you noticed as the crowd warmed up, they warmed up.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
interaction between groups was rather spectacular. Yeah.
It's such a kind of, on so many levels, it's such a brave thing to do.
It is, isn't it?
Because
Yeah.
everything that you hope will ignite might not ignite.
Exactly, a crowd that doesn't get into it, or a line that won't come to you, or
So, wow.
No, it was neat, wasn't it?
It was.
Really good. So I need to share with you, I was going to go to the other one.
Right.
And then I realised when you were sitting next to me, I was going to come to your one. And then I read and I kind of felt Shakti and Shiva were tapping me on my shoulder.
Oh, that's very kind. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh. Do you have a link to India or?
Organised religion has fascinated me since day one.
Right.
I have endeavoured to educate myself in every level of each of the ones during the whole life.
Right.
For me, animism, that being our first form of faith that came out of Africa, that's the one I relate to most.
Right.
I've just done a course, Awakening the Divine Goddess.
Right.
And through that, I was, through my meditations, Shakti, Shiva, and then understanding the Kundalini and what's happening there. So that's kind of got me into rereading and more about Hinduism.
Right. Right.
I did have those last time, but
Yeah.
chicken and whatnot. Kind of realising that
do you want to talk?
I think with this, my voice should carry.
Should carry.
Yeah.
Classic
Thank you. Thank you.
Or do you like to, if you like me, I like to okay, so here's the little clicker.
Yeah.
So you just eat an arrow and go forward.
Yeah. Sure. And that's it. Right. Brilliant. Thank you so much for setting that up.
That's okay. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
So there you go.
Do I need to point or
Just in the general direction.
oh, in the general of the laptop?
Yeah.
Sure. Brilliant.
Just in
Thank
the
you.
general direction.
Thank you.
There you go. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Be back in a minute.
Oh. Sorry. Hi, I'm Raj. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. Kind of more than one place. I was more than compatible where the book is actually set. So the photograph will be from there. But I also grew up in what's now Australia. And then my parents come from different places and they met in Calcutta. So I kind of grew up speaking both Bengali and Hindi as my mother tongue. So yeah.
My wife is Indian, but she comes from
Oh right.
The parents were changed shops.
Oh right. So they were spoken Malayalam.
That's right.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, she used to know.
Right. Wow. So she grew up in Malaya.
No. Yes, she did.
Right.
Yes, she did.
Wow.
Joe will go over.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
this is the one, yes, yeah, it's up to three,
Right.
up to this one. And then off to Denise Irvine and the next
Right.
year.
You live in all right, yeah.
Yeah, because I've come to realise how important human can be
All right.
in bringing the
That was
tragedy
years ago.
All right.
I ended up watching, oh my
Thank you
God,
so
now
much
it's
for
gone
inviting
on
me.
my mind. The Messiah complex is absolutely gorgeous and he's so in touch with his federal self.
Thank you. I
And
was,
it's quarter past
for
10
my
at night
last
and
book,
now
I
it's on my
actually
own,
had
I'm giving the stand standing
memorial
out
evening, an event
because
at
he discussed
Council
Hitler
of
and
Library.
the shit that
So
happened,
I
but
can
gave it comedy and gave it life and so we were able to see the tragedy of our beliefs and thoughts about what is right and wrong. It's really Russell Brand.
No, at that point, I've been living in Wellington, but I went on a mini book tour
So
and
comedy plays a
a stop at Council of Library a couple of years ago. But I still remember the interaction after the reading.
yes, with pure tragic.
So, and I met someone who's at the university, but had grown up in my mother's hometown in India, Henry Bernard.
Oh, Henry
Doing
Bernard.
the
Yeah,
comedy and how it's done.
So,
yes, of course. It's,
and
yes, it's
we had this amazing thing where we were, yeah, and so we were talking about, like, India, and it turned out that he'd grown up in the same small town as my mother's hometown. He was by the way, and had gone, essentially had gone to the same school, boys' school, as my uncles. So it was just to be a story. So,
Yeah, every time. Yes. And just like
right, yeah.
You'll, yeah, it'll take you, yeah, you'll be the next one. Yeah, so,
Right.
yeah, my father, we, you know, started a few years ago. There's a gentleman here, most of the time he was out there, and he used to treat me as a sister. I was a sister Margaret.
He was very,
That's my
very
training at one day. Anyway, about 1 week was up with me, and
Right,
I said,
right.
"Oh, you know, the so-and-so's house in David, it's fantastic." And I went,
Oh,
yes, it is, and it's no problem. He goes, "Oh, fuck would you know? You've never been there, Anna." just with this moment of clarity at 4 in the morning, we lost his Alzheimer's, and then 30 seconds later, I was back to being Margaret. It was just what a moment. What a human day.
These people will be here before, so I won't do it. Another safety
they were yesterday. Yeah, it's
Is
some of
the
them.
toilet full unmentionable?
No, no,
They're
no.
fine, they're fine. So, do you want me to introduce you, or do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
I think you know who you've come to see. This is Raj.
We'd like to know how to pronounce it.
Rajorshi. Yeah, Rajorshi.
But everyone calls me right.
That's all I've been told. So I'm just going to talk to you about his book Shakti, and I think you've written another book as well.
I've written a few others, but 2 of them are available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So thank you
Thank you
for
so
coming from
much.
Wellington.
No, pleasure.
Thank you,
Delighted
and
to be here.
enjoy. Thank you. See you.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming this morning. I'm Raj. I live in Wellington. I'm originally from India, and I'm here to introduce a novel that it's called Shakti, and I'll talk a bit about it and tell you a bit about the title. And it appeared in February this year, and kind of got up to a good start. And then, of course, we went into lockdown, and so this is probably like. It is actually the first live event I've done since we came out of lockdown to talk about the book. So what I thought I'd do today is, the other thing I do on an absolutely amateur basis and using a very ordinary phone is take a lot of photographs. So, but entirely as an amateur. And I thought by way of introducing the world of Shakti, which is set entirely in India and largely in the city of Calcutta or Kolkata. I thought to introduce the world of Shakti, I'd share some of my street photographs, largely from Calcutta, to give you a visual sense of that world, and to talk a bit about how the photographs kind of relate to my writing or have a relationship with my writing, and then do a short reading from the book, and then maybe tell you a little bit about where the book came from. I kind of wrote at the time, kind of before COVID took over the world, I kind of wrote an introduction to how I came to write about Shakti. So, but yeah, so to introduce the book, Shakti is a word, is a Hindi word or a Bengali word, which comes down to us from Sanskrit, and it can mean, it has many meanings, but largely means strength or force or power, you know, and so that's the kind of, it means strength or force or power. And Shakti, the novel Shakti is a story which begins with three women of different ages and different backgrounds in the city of Calcutta. Please welcome. Three women in the city of different ages and different backgrounds who all kind of one day separately kind of discover that they have unique magic powers and supernatural seeming powers. And not only are they supernatural seeming powers, these are powers that seem to know them intimately. They seem to kind of emerge from some of their deepest longings and know their deepest desires. But of course, very soon as the story progresses, without giving anything away, they realize that the powers come at a price, and someone is pulling the strings. And then as the novel evolves, the mystery becomes who is distributing these powers and what is their agenda. That's why the subtitle is Your Power, Our Rules. So you have this power, but you play by our rules. So that's the kind of broad story of Shakti. But shall we start with the photographs?
Yes.
Yeah? And let's see. Sorry. Oh, sorry, I'll just get Vicky.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. So just sorry. No worries. No worries.
Oh, it's actually Vicky's account. I'll grab her real quick.
So just by way of introduction to the photographs, like I said, they're taken entirely, they're taken with the phone in my pocket, very amateur basis, but I would say there are a few relationships between the photographs I take and the writing I do.
Sorry.
Thanks,
I
Vicky.
didn't think it would. Sorry. Not meant to do.
Just tell us your password and we'll take care of it.
Yeah, that's it. You'll see. Look,
There we are.
just put my application in for CE.
Thank you.
There you go. Sorry.
So, and I'd say that there are a few relationships between the photographs I take and the writing that I do, and I'd say that they probably come in three different ways. Which the first of which is the sheer act of walking, and and almost all of the photographs you'll see are taken as a result of long walks through the city, and I'm a bit, yeah. So I'll put this down for a second. And walking has a relationship both with the photographs and with my writing, because different writers have different ways that they build up to the next scene or the next chapter they write. And my kind of weird quirk is that for every kind of scene I need to write, or every couple of pages, I actually need to go for a walk first in order for it to play out like a scene in my head, and I kind of vaguely visualize the bare bones of the scene, and then the actual writing is the putting of flesh on those bones. So I actually need to walk before I know what I'm going to write next. And the photographs as well come out of walking. So there's a kind of very direct relationship in walking for me. as it happens, the walks I take in order to write are taken around a very familiar set of blocks in my neighborhood of Karori in Wellington. And there you don't want to be distracted too much by the unfamiliar, because you're actually walking to discover things inside in order to write. But when I take these photographs, it's the opposite. I'm walking entirely to notice new things, surprising things. So when you walk to photograph, it's very different from walking in order to write later. So, but the one thing that's in common with the walking that you do for photographs and the walking that you do to write is that these walks are a practice in noticing, They're a practice in noticing, and in a way, the photographs are just a document, an ongoing document of the practice of noticing. Noticing the beautiful, the surprising, the unusual. So that's another theme in common between writing and taking pictures for me, which is they both emerge from a need to notice and a love of noticing. So that's the second thing. And the final thing I want to say is that some of the photographs try to, as photographs do, try to capture a moment or a pattern, an unconscious pattern brought together by an arrangement of people and light and shadows that will change in the very next moment. And if I'm lucky, I'll get my phone out and capture it. So some of the photographs emerge from that need to capture the ephemeral. And some other photographs, a few of which you'll see, are almost a kind of capture what could be the seed of a story, because what they try to capture and hopefully honor and evoke for a viewer is someone who occupies a place on a pavement or in the street life of a city, and they live much of their lives in that place. They have their occupation there, or they have their stall there, and what the photograph hopes to evoke is the beginning of a story, that if you look closely at this person, you will see how much of their life and living they have invested in that place, that little bit of pavement, and they've made it their own. And so it's the beginning of a story. So for a would-be storyteller such as myself, that's the other thing they do. They act as springboards to stories. And the final role that the photographs play for me is, a lot of the writing I do is remembered, because a lot of the writing I do, as almost entirely with this book, is set in India, but I'm doing it in Wellington. And so the photographs play another role, which is they act as an aide-memoire. Like they help me remember and bring to life in Wellington scenes and places and people I'm writing about, and faces I'm writing about in India. So they play that other role as well. So with that, so this is just to give, because this book is almost entirely set in Calcutta, most of the photographs are just to give you a sense of the city, for those of you who might not have a big visual archive with relation to particularly Calcutta. It's to give you a sense of the city. So this was actually a rare moment when the city center was car-free, and so you get a sense of the range of old architectures in Calcutta. Because there was a political demonstration, this part was quite car-free. And so from, that was once the theater, this Deco theater in the front, was once the theater where MGM exclusively released its movies. So it was the Metro Theater, and then next to it was kind of Calcutta's, at that time, it was Calcutta's Harrods. So that was this department store called Whiteway Laidlaw, which is still a department store, but a different one. So, but you get this kind of Indo-European architecture, which is, a mix of Indian elements and European elements in that department store next to the Deco Theater. So it kind of gives you a sense of old Calcutta city center. And there's much more like it. But this, on the other hand, is an example of a kind of late 19th century, early 20th century family home. So from the kind of city center type building to the domestic. And that taxi in front is anyone who's kind of, it's the old taxis that are now being phased out, but they're kind of, once upon a time, they were quite iconic to Calcutta. So, but this is, now we're coming to neighborhood streets, to give it, the next few photographs are of neighborhood streets because much of the novel unfolds in domestic neighborhoods. So, so again, and these are alleyways, and you kind of, in the small while, you get a sense of, you get a sense of how much life is contained even in this narrow alleyway like that. That this is early morning, and I was on a walk, and so the light is quite particular. And the person who's kind of leaning in their stall is he's the ironing person. So everyone in this neighborhood would bring their clothes that need ironing to him, and he would have this amazing memory of which clothes go to which bundles go to which homes, and then deliver them personally without, most of them don't note it down on paper, it's just visual. So he's still, his day has not yet begun. She's off somewhere, and if you look next to her, there's a broom. There's a kind of broom that's lined up against a wall, and it's the person who sweeps the streets in the morning. So it's just a sense of the inside life of domestic neighborhoods. Again, another one where, there are some unique features here. Again, you see, these would all be neighborhoods from the late 19th century. And some of the unique things of Calcutta are those window shutters on the first floor. You see those window shutters? And if you see the vertical rod in the middle, they are the ways in which women in the 19th century, particularly women whose movements outside the home were much more restricted, by pulling that vertical window shutter, what they could do was, it opened the Louvre. It kind of opened and allowed you to peer outside without being seen from inside. And so those wooden window shutters are iconic from that period of this late 19th and early 20th century, because they allowed you to look outside, especially if you, but not be seen. So that's, again, but this is another insight. And this is a photograph of a neighborhood street at night. So much of this novel unfolds at night, and it's kind of got a noir quality. And so I wanted you to have a sense of what the streets look like in especially domestic neighborhood streets look like at night. And what you see next to the man who's parked under the tree is a cycle rickshaw. So it's a rickshaw that's operated by a person in front biking along, and about 2 people can sit on that bench. But again, gives you a sense of street life inside neighborhoods. And the reason I picked this photograph is the older part of Calcutta is the north, and the newer part from which the earlier photographs come is the south. But the reason I picked this photograph is there is a character in this book, and if we have time, I'll read an extract to do with her. And she's a domestic help. And this lady seen from the back, the way she's wearing her sari would be very similar to the way I imagine one of my principal characters, who's a seamstress and a domestic help, how she would be dressed. So it's to give you a visual idea of her, like a working class woman who's a seamstress, but supplements her income as a domestic help. And that's in old Calcutta. That would be a stately home. Again, you see if you can see the same sort of windows again, where you get to pull from inside and the windows open, but you can see outside, but you won't be seen. And as with many major cities, Calcutta is, started off because it's on this river, and it's a tributary of the Ganges River called the Hooghly River, and that to any Indian, that bridge is kind of an iconic emblem of Calcutta, like the cable car in Wellington or the square, so that it's the Howrah Bridge that connects Calcutta with the Twin City. So it's just, and those are passenger ferries that take people back and forth. So now we're coming to some. So one of the other major characters in the book, who also receives a Shakti, she's a school teacher, but has a secret identity as an agony aunt to help young people with all sorts of questions they have, particularly related to romance and sex. And that's her secret identity because she teaches at quite a conservative school, and they wouldn't want to know about the kind of candid advice she gives young people. But the reason I captured this picture, again, evoking the river, is that one of the things that's very, very hard to come by in Calcutta are spaces for romance. And the reason is partly it's because people live in quite small, cramped apartments. So imagine lockdown in India. People live in very cramped apartments, but also families can be quite conservative. And neighborhoods are quite, you saw those neighborhood lanes. People look into each other's homes. There's a lot of gossip. And so it's very, very hard to find spaces just for romance. And so, they have found, this is the beginning of winter, so people were wearing shawls and pullovers. Their romance is, on the one hand, it's an open public space. It's a park by the river, but their privacy is under their shawl. So, that's how, so that I just want, because young people are a major focus of one of the characters in the book, and I just thought that picture really captures how hard young people can find it, to find somewhere to be private, away from grown-ups, neighborhood gossip, and all, So they go to the riverside or parks. And then this is just to give you a sense of just street life and traffic this is one of Calcutta's major markets, and these are, in other countries they're called tuk-tuks, in India they're called auto rickshaws, and what you see largely, and they claim now to be fueled by natural gas, but sometimes I think they've often just painted themselves green and the same emissions but you wonder whether they are fueled by natural gas. But anyway, but that's a very, again, street life is a big part of the book. So, and so here I've got a few photographs of livings people make and occupations people carry out on different parts of the street. So, on the one hand, we have our big covered markets, but you also have these morning markets where people bring this to be a little closer to people's homes, people bring this wide variety of produce and lay it out on a part of the pavement or the street, and you just get this incredible array of fresh produce. And again, you see women who've come to buy, and at the back you see another of Calcutta's kind of, it's on its way out, but it's another iconic kind of Calcutta conveyance, which is the human-pulled rickshaw. You had the cycle rickshaw before and the auto rickshaw. This is their ancestor, the human-pulled rickshaw. And there are very few left, but they still exist, and someone's getting pulled along by a human-pulled rickshaw. And meanwhile, this is a neighborhood market spilling over from the pavement onto the street. And then this is a fruit vendor, on the pavement, another pavement stall. And I said, sometimes some photographs are trying to capture the ephemeral, but others are trying to show how someone who has occupied a space and made it their own and poured so much of their life into it, like this person might spend 14 hours a day at his or her stall. So, and in the morning they lay out their fruit like that, and in the evening it's all packed away. And so, each of these photographs tries to honor the fact that so much of this person's living is done in that space, on that spot, And the other reason why I picked this particular photograph is that, and I'll come to that, the book is in large part about life under a far right-wing government, and it's about far right-wing politics focused on India, but it's also about far right-wing politics and how and why they've been enjoying such a wave of success in several different countries around the world, and in India, the target of the far right begins with our large Muslim population, and so you can tell from his cap and his beard that this fruit vendor would be a Muslim, and they are very much the targets in lots of ways. Making them uncomfortable in their own country is very much a kind of stated purpose of our present government, and the book is very much about that as well. So this on the other, so this is, and this relates to Shakti because, so this is a stall, a temporary stall on the eve of a particular puja. A puja is a Hindu word for worship. And this particular goddess who's going to be worshipped is the goddess of learning and music, Saraswati. And she is domestic enough to be worshipped in individual homes. There are some gods and goddesses who are worshipped in neighborhood. The neighborhood comes together to organize a big puja. Others you can worship in a more intimate way in your own home. And she is the god, she's got a sitar, and she's the goddess of learning and music. And very conveniently, her puja always comes along about 2 weeks before the equivalent of the NCEAs. So students are going through a particularly devout phase. So every home that has a young person about to sit exams will buy one of these images, and the kind of last minute bit of extra. Why take chances? I have studied. Why take chances? Have a bob each way. So that is why Saraswati in February is particularly popular, because a lot of young people are about to take exams, and but also, the magic powers that are promised in Shakti are kind of seem to come from gods and goddesses and tap into people's deep Hindu beliefs about gods and goddesses. And so gods and goddesses and their presence in our minds plays a big role in the novel as well. So this, on the other hand, is from the floor above, a view of a mall food court. So, the Indian middle classes, as middle classes in many, many other countries, spend a large part of their time in malls. And I just thought I'd give you a sense of what a mall food court looks like. And yeah, so, but a lot of these same people would also be worshipping Saraswati while possessing an advanced education and science degrees. And so there's no contradiction, they just sit together. But, so you've got street life and people selling food and snacks and veg on the street, but you've also got middle class life here in a mall food court. And then on the other hand, his expertise, this is the back of a sweet shop. It was the workshop of a sweet shop, and his expertise is filling and folding samosas. So he's putting in the filling. As you can see, the triangular samosas behind him are already ready to be fried, and the kind of bits of dough in the foreground he's going to fill. So this is one person, and that is his this kind of, I watched him for a while, the kind of kneading, and he let me watch him. It was an open workshop, and the door was open. I was on the pavement, and just again another person who makes a space his own because of the care with which he works there and how much time he spends there, and this is his space, So, and this, another skeptical looking gentleman looking at me, but is again another example of how the myriad ways in which pavements are used in a city like Calcutta. And one of Bengal's obsessions is this, the province of Bengal, or the state of Bengal, is this state in which Calcutta is the capital. And it's a very riverine state. Both Bengal and neighboring Bangladesh are crisscrossed by rivers, because very, very big rivers, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, are on their way to meeting the Bay of Bengal. So Bengal occupies the delta. So it's a land of rivers, and consequently it's a land of fish. People eat a lot of fish. They get a lot of their animal protein from fish. And so you get fish vendors, and fish markets are a big part of life. So it's just a picture of. And again, you get these incredible faces, these people. And what he makes is snacks. And the two big sacks in the foreground are puffed rice, which can be used as the base for a variety of snacks, to which you add other spices, chickpeas, nuts, and all of those are in the different jars around him. And he has this entire menu of things he offers. For the most expensive thing he offers might be a big paper bag worth 50 cents. But on your way to somewhere while waiting for a bus, you get a snack mixed up by him, which is kind of like it can often be like a fresh salad, but he's again, more life on the pavement. And this photograph I love, again, because it shows you how people share a public space. So you've got, this is a neighborhood park, and you've got people, you know, which kind of shows the diversity of Calcutta. You've got people from different communities, including two Sikh men at one corner, and you've got people from different communities kind of sharing apartments. They might be, this is about 4, taken at 4:30 in the evening. So they might be friends who meet every evening to chat. But the other thing I love about the photograph is how the woman, the sole woman on the bench, has made a space for herself by turning the other way. And so she's got a space for herself, but on the other hand, she's also, that's my space, because, you know, it's, there's 6 men and then there's 1 woman, and how she's made a space for herself.
How easy would that be for you to do?
Well, exactly. So, you know, if she were to sit kind of, this is this incredible unspoken web of assumptions. If she were to sit just a little bit differently for you and me, completely natural, if she were to just sit like that, there would be men sitting next to her who would imagine that that was an invitation to them to strike up a conversation. You know, when all she intended was to just sit and have a rest or look at the park. So you've got to be a, yeah. So as women using a public space in India, so you know, India sits somewhere on the spectrum, I would say, in between, where just as an imaginary spectrum, you've got one extreme end is, say, your Saudi Arabia, and another extreme end is, you know, relatively Western country and the free use of public space by people of all genders. And India would sit somewhere in the middle, where you see a lot of women in public space, but if you watch them closely, or if you know them personally, or if you've grown up there, you'll be aware that they're following a lot of invisible codes and rules that women teach other women, that men don't even need to know, and boys don't even need to know, but girls absorb from their mothers and grow up to be women. And of course, a lot of young women were challenging those rules and saying, we don't want to live hemmed in by these invisible lasers and rules. But someone of her generation and her would definitely be aware that to sit on a bench in one way is sending one message, not the message that I don't intend at all to send, but that's how men would read them. So,
is that possibly why a lot of Western women get themselves in the shit when they go there? Because they don't know those rules?
well, and also I feel just for being Western, they would probably be looked at much.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. And then they don't, and so then they would go into spaces just innocently, like, you know,
with the wrong message.
out of curiosity and exploration. But the men there would read that differently. So that can happen. And then again, this is another use of a public space. This is actually a space under a major flyover, under which originally on a traffic island, some people began playing chess. Some enthusiasts began playing chess with all of the pollution and the honking of horns and everything around. But gradually it became such a popular space that the government put in some money, the state government, the city council put in some money and kind of turned them into benches where now still it's a majority of men, but women and young people and it's kind of chess club. But what I liked about it is, you know, all around, what I can't convey to you is the noise and the honking. It's a major intersection, a very major traffic intersection, and these two men are lost in, managed to block all that out and play this game of chess. But I also like her sitting there and watching the game, and she's taking a break to watch the game. I don't know if she's a member as well who's going to play later, but I like the way and he's on his phone in another world. He's just, but I just like, but all of this is happening in, you know, one of South Calcutta's busiest, loudest intersections. So, which the photograph can't convey except the rush of an auto rickshaw going past. So, and this photograph, I only had one word for it, which is the caption, because this was a stretch of pavement where there are a lot of homeless people who've made temporary shelters. And this is actually an extremely busy road, including trams that run in the middle. There's tram lines. So there's trams that run in the middle. It's an extremely busy road. It's this moment that I captured is illusory, that there are no moving vehicles in the street. But because I know that as soon as that light turned green, these cars would be rushing again, I just, their parents probably live in one of the lean-tos on the pavement over here, and it just captured the incredible vulnerability of the physical vulnerability of these children, not to mention all the other kinds of vulnerability that surround children in such situations in India. Vulnerability to being trafficked, to being, enslaved, but even the sheer physical vulnerability of, which is another big dimension of street life in big Indian cities. And then they were a brother-sister pair who were actually in my parents' neighborhood, and what they had been was doing something really interesting. They had that plastic bag, and they were collecting these leaflets or flyers, and then I kind of watched them, and they were sitting at this gate, and what she was doing was trying to spell out and read some words from the leaflets that they collected. So that's, and probably their parents would, compared to, I mean, it's entire, just a matter of degree, but like compared to them, their parents would probably be slightly better off, have a slightly more permanent dwelling to live in, and maybe both of them have slightly less precarious jobs, and so they're just slightly less vulnerable, but again enormously so. And then the last two photographs are not to do with Calcutta at all. They're taken in other places in India, but they were women. The women in these photographs were women I very much had in mind as I was writing the women in this book, in Shakti. So that's why I thought I'd share them, because it was on a morning walk in southern India in the town of Pondicherry, and I managed to capture her cycling past, and she stayed in my mind somehow as a model for the characters I was trying to create while I wrote this book. Something about her carriage and the freedom with which she was cycling through a space, going to work or going somewhere. Yeah, and she's So, and then the last photograph again were stayed with me because this was taken in Chennai, which used to be called Madras in southern India, and these were four friends who come to the seaside. It was quite choppy water, but and they were venturing in that far. They were still in their saris or their salwar kameezes, and the image of the four of them facing the choppy sea was very much again in my mind while creating the characters and the stories in Shakti. So even though the story doesn't go to Chennai, but this moment was in my mind. So
did you illustrate any pictures for your book?
No, this is not a novel with illustrations, but hopefully in the writing some pictures will kind of convey themselves to the reader, but no, it's not illustrated. But these were some of the pictures at the back of my mind. And with that, were there any questions about the photographs?
Just to thank you that
Thank
particularly that lady with her back and the way you explained that was really powerful.
That was
To understand that these women had picked up subconsciously ways to behave that keep you safe.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But also create their freedom within.
Yeah, in the same way.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I wanted to read an extract from the book in which the youngest of the women in the book to receive powers, she's a 15-year-old girl, and she kind of has received her power, and is completely, it has startled her. The effect that the power has had on her has come as such a shock that she writes in to the agony aunt, who's one of the other major characters. She writes into the agony aunt to kind of convey how she's feeling, and I wanted to read that extract because in one go it introduces two of the major characters of the book. Yeah, so that's what I'll read. So yeah, it's a very early twist in the book. So I'm kind of giving away only one of the book's earliest twists, which is that at the time of writing, the agony aunt's persona in the column is actually that of a man, of an uncle to write to, and the reason for that again is this very conservative school she teaches at, where she wants to protect her identity and have this other life as a columnist, but to give herself an extra layer of protection, she actually poses as a man. Her persona is that of a man, which is why the column is addressed to a man, but actually, we find out quite soon after, the agony aunt is actually a woman. So she says, "Sir, a friend told me about your column because I needed some advice. I love the answers with which you help people. But this letter is not for your column. Please, for my safety, do not publish it. Yet I would dearly love an answer from you. Sir, my problem is that I can bring about anything I want. And I mean anything. I began to be aware of it 9 days ago, and at first I believed I had become extremely lucky. But this isn't luck. Now I only feel afraid. I must sound crazy. First of all, for imagining that I can make anything happen, and secondly, for not feeling lucky about this. But let me give you an example. The incident that made up my mind to write to you. You'll soon see the other reason why this cannot be made public. I behaved like a monster. I would be arrested. What I did was completely wrong, but I only dared to try it because I was so sure it would work. Because by now I'm sure that I can bring about anything I want. There is a 15-year-old girl who comes after school to help her mother in our house. Her mother does our cooking, cleaning, and other housework. We live in a flat on the 5th floor. Yesterday afternoon, the girl had come into my room to sweep the floor, and when she was outside on the balcony, I suddenly picked her up, plunged her right down to the ground floor, and brought her back up again. All in one movement that took probably 30 seconds, maybe less. And I never moved from my bed. I accomplished all this with my mind, simply because I wanted to. The girl was unhurt, although absolutely terrified. This is the moment to mention that I too am a 15-year-old girl. In fact, I'm 7 weeks younger than the girl I hurled down and raised up 5 floors. Of course, she has no idea it was me. As I said, I remained throughout on my bed, sitting against the cushions, appearing to chat on my iPad. I know I sound mad, but if someone had been watching, either on the ground or from another building, or else from a balcony below or above us, they would have seen it all. What I had planned and then achieved was like the activity of bungee jumping, only without a rope. Imagine a bungee jump conducted on an unsuspecting person in which they themselves saw nothing, yet felt an irresistible force. My mind was that force. I executed the move perfectly, just as I had come to expect after a week of wielding this gift. I would not have dared to attempt something so risky with someone else if I had not been 100% confident of pulling it off. I repeat, she was unhurt. But the tears and the terror that overcame her afterwards made a great impact on me. I realized to my shame that I had put 2 days of planning into the jump, thinking about the right time and the right person, yet at no point had it occurred to me that, for example, this girl might suffer a heart attack. I had been so confident about bringing her back in one piece that I forgot to consider the other effects of the shock. Yesterday afternoon, she managed to run back into my room, away from the balcony, and collapsed on the floor. It took 20 minutes for her mother to get a story out of her. I pretended I'd seen nothing. In fact, I initiated the suggestion, taken up afterwards by everyone except the girl, that it must have been a touch of the afternoon sun. A dizzy spell, I argued, combined with being on the balcony, would have felt exactly like falling. Today, of course, she has stayed away. Her mother said she didn't go to school. Neither did I, although I'm in school uniform right now, but I'm in a cafe writing to you. If you're almost convinced that I'm mad, meet me before you make up your mind. Let me show you what I can do. How will you reply, sir? Right now, I'm dangerous to myself and to others, and I need your help. I don't recognize the person who planned yesterday's stunt so methodically and calmly. The entire time, I thought of it as an experiment or a test. And the one thing she failed to see was another girl just like her. Yours sincerely, Shivani. P.S. I hope you understand the main reason why it would be so harmful to publish this letter. Can you imagine the flood of people who would try to contact me in the hope of fulfilling their wishes? I'll stop there. So that was one of the three women who start the book, discovering her powers and the impact they had on her, and being jolted by it. So let me just see how much time I have. So, any questions so far?
Why did you choose women protagonists out of interest?
Well, very good question. So, on the one hand, as a writer, this was my 7th published book. Seventh. And as a writer, one of the things that had happened was that I'd never written a novel. I'd written obviously I'd written lots of women characters, but I'd never yet attempted the challenge of telling an entire story, an entire novel with a woman narrator. Yeah, that was one. That was on a kind of technical level. I felt it was time to attempt that as an imaginative challenge and to see if that came across as convincing and powerful. But the other one was that, which is something I'm going to read in this essay, the other challenge was thematic, which is that the book is very much about India in the grip of a right-wing government, a very powerful government that spreads messages of hatred and division and hierarchy and conservatism. And among the other things they spread are also messages of patriarchy and misogyny, And I felt that it would be a far more powerful rendition of life under a patriarchal and misogynistic regime if the main characters telling their story were women. So it was, so that was the other reason, that it would impinge, that the government we have, and many other countries similar, that the regimes we have and some of the things they do impinge on women's lives in ways that, in far deeper ways, because they try to restrict women's freedoms and women's rights and women's opportunities in far more restrictive ways, alongside minorities that they target. So that was another reason.
So the world and the culture that you create, it's really so different certainly from any experience I've ever had. How do you decide how much detail you need to put in there to get the reader who has no experience of that to understand?
Well, I think you would be, based on you would be a wonderful judge of that. Like, to what extent did the scene or the extract come alive for you, even though that world is unfamiliar to you?
Yeah, I
So-
can picture that, and really sort of, people are people in many ways.
Yeah.
I wondered how you decide this detail goes in and is necessary to frame the scene, or I'm getting too much into the description now. I need to cut that out because it's boring or whatever. I wonder how you make that decision.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful question, and I think it's for someone like me who writes both for readers in India, but also for readers elsewhere. You're kind of trying to strike a balance between. It must feel true and real to Indian readers who would know this reality, and it must, they must be able to recognize it, and it feels true for them. And there are many things that would be superfluous to mention for them because they would just be able to fill in those details. But on the other hand, it must have enough detail to come alive for a reader from somewhere else, from Australia or New Zealand, for whom it would be unfamiliar otherwise. So there must be enough detail that is sketched in for them to be able to enter the scene and picture it. But one of the things I have an enormous amount of faith in, which again goes to the heart of writing fiction, which is the idea that a great belief in the idea that the reader meets you halfway, and the reader's imagination meets you halfway. And I think that's part of, that's part of what is always happening when you read a page rather than watch something on a screen. And I really believe that if the story is compelling enough on different levels, both as plot, it makes you turn the page, you care about the characters, you invest emotionally, it interests you. I really believe that as long as there's enough physical detail to set the scene and kind of to set the scene and more or less get the action running, I feel the reader will rush in with their imagination to complete the picture. There's only so much you need to provide by way of visual detail and by way of action, and then just trust that if you're holding the reader's interest, their imagination will complete the scene and bring the rest to life. And in a weird way, it's a kind of it's also what happens inevitably. Like the other alternative is for the writer to be a control freak and fill in every last detail. But actually, that level of control doesn't work anyway, because each of us will bring our own visual archive to anything we read. And each of us will have a slightly different image in mind anyway, for a face or a place. So I just trust to that happening in any case, and my main aim is I must interest and engage the reader emotionally and on other levels, intrigue them, engage them, move them, and then let their imagination complete the picture. So,
Can I ask, what is it that drives you to write a story from women's point of view?
yeah, so in this particular
Why
case,
is it so important to you from a woman's point of view?
well, that's
Is it because the regime is, that you worry about the state of women in these countries?
enormously so,
We
along
hear
with,
about the Taliban and what they've done, ISIS and what they've done, and Saudi Arabia, when he was there, we only know a little bit in the West.
yeah.
You do sort of feel terrible for them.
So definitely it's in this particular case to highlight what life has been like under the particular government we've had over the past 6 years, and how life has changed for various people, including religious minorities and women. But I also think that,
Have you seen how different it is for your sisters and for your mother? Has that been an inspiration for you to think?
very much, yeah, and the levels of violence that take many different forms in Indian life against women, is also at the heart of writing this book. And I think in general, I think always readers are, and in this particular case, women readers would be the best judges and are the ultimate judges, which is, I feel like, it's at the heart of the imaginative challenge that writing fiction is about, which is an opportunity not just to tell your own story or the story you know well, but to take a few steps into imagining other stories, other realities. So, that's at the heart of the Otherwise, in lots of ways, memoir or first-person autobiographical stories would be all that we could do as writers. But one of the things many writers attempt is, at least they attempt it, and then they leave it to the reader, particularly readers from that specific background, to tell them whether they are persuaded. But one of the things writers attempt is to tell stories other than their own. And so that's another thing I was trying, to tell stories of a range of women from different social backgrounds and see if I could make it come alive to readers who would then feel persuaded, yes, this is convincing, this feels true. So so that was the other challenge I set myself.
Were you first published in like New Zealand, or was it published in India first?
It came out in India just a couple of months. Like, it came out in India last November,
Yep.
and in New Zealand in February.
So I guess I'm thinking about the editing. So it was, I guess, did you have an Indian editor? So
it was we tried, again, so it speaks to your earlier question, we have a uniform edition.
Yeah.
So again, it was trying to walk that line where it would manage to hopefully hold a New Zealand reader's interest who had relatively little prior knowledge of this Indian reality, but at the same time, it would, people living in India now would immediately go, yes, this reflects the world we know. So, but it doesn't have, for example, I chose not to have, say, a glossary of words at the end, or or terms familiar. I just thought I'm going to trust to see that even when there are realities really unfamiliar, that the reader, after a while, if the reader is engaged and intrigued, the reader extends not just their imagination to complete the imagination of the writer. The reader also, I feel, extends a lot of trust to the writer, that even if you're leading me into unfamiliar realms, I'm going to go with you. I might not know everything in that world, but I'm going to go with you. You will take me through. So, and I very much trust to that. So.
Have you had a huge readership, a lot of sales for your book?
Well, with this one in particular, it was in both places. Things started very well, and there was a very good reception. And then, as for many of us who published during this year, there's been this kind of big interruption. We're all struggling to recover from it, And in India, case numbers have only been climbing. So all of the normal ways in which people discover books, such as going to libraries, or bookshops, or festivals, all of those are cancelled for the moment. So people are just focused on staying safe.
Actually, I've heard that bit that you read out. Have you been serialised on Radio New Zealand or reviewed on there?
No, but I did read that opening out once, and that was recorded.
On Radio New Zealand?
Yeah, right. Well, I do have other bits as well at the beginning, but I read that out because it was. So, right.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd read it. There was one other thing I wanted to read out, which again, I've been talking a bit about the political context in which the book was set, and I kind of wrote an introduction to kind of give some sense of why I wanted to tell this story and why I told it in this magical way. So I'll read out that small introduction to set the scene a little bit, it's called On Shakti. So in Shakti, I wanted to tell a story that would comprise elements drawn both from the real and the magical. The book is set in present-day India, which is my country of origin, but I believe people living in several other places will recognize many of its strands and aspects. Here is a non-exhaustive list of some of the real-world themes I explore, as well as a few of the book's magical ingredients. To give you an accurate sense of the universe of Shakti, I'm leaving them unsifted in the listing. 1. A ruling political party with uncanny antennae for the wounds and grievances certain people carry, and for their longing to return to imagined utopias. 2. A mysterious technology so powerful that it feels like magic as it enters and reads you, and which learns you better the longer it inhabits you. It can give you exactly the past you ache for and make your most deeply held dreams come true. This Shakti, this power, is gifted, however, to select members of the population who belong both to the majority community as well as crucial political constituencies. In short, there is an us to whom everything is promised, but only as long, and this is the Faustian price, but only as long as they obey orders against various thems. Live your dreams, Photoshop your memories exactly as you'd like, but be careful as you handle them, because your gifts will bloody your hands. What if big data were to meet the oldest human yearnings for miracles, healing, and magic? How is big data meeting, as we speak, the equally deep longings that rulers have for omniscience and control? What if a miracle implant could be used to divide people, to divide populations to suit political ends? Or if it promises to release the best in people while secretly enslaving them through ties of complicity, guilt, and greed. While writing the novel, I would forward myself links to news articles from Brazil, the US, Britain, Israel, India of course, China, and elsewhere. I like to think my story acquires some power and truth from such awareness. But, to my mind, its magical aspects aren't entirely fictitious. In the magical thinking practiced by particular political figures in each of these societies, in the apparent potency of their narratives about glorious pasts and/or fearsome futures, in the darkness unleashed by their coded hints and explicit permissions, in the full range of transformative possibilities released by the technologies that we already use that we can barely chart or understand, I found most of the dark magic I needed. A final thought, without giving away any specifics of the plot, that if the 21st century is going to be full of conflict about ever scarcer amounts of livable land and usable water, not to mention jobs that still require people, the narratives in each society seeking to define in-groups with established rights to such resources against various infiltrating thems are only going to proliferate, get louder, more ruthless. Those of us who find such a vision of the future toxic and unacceptable will need to fight not just for a more sustainable way to live, but also for better stories. Beneath their many lies, the dark magicians of the present sense a deep truth, that the stories we believe in move and connect us, make us want to embrace and share. Science takes its time to persuade. Stories cut straight to the heart. Better science is how we either live or kill. Stories are why, which makes changing the story the laziest yet quickest way to change the world. From India to Britain to North and South America, many are hard at work on terrible stories, as if the future depends on it. Shakti looks at one such case. And the other thing I wanted to add as an epilogue is that this introduction was written pre-corona. And you know, one of the weird things about coronavirus, this same virus, the same biological organism, a microorganism that we're all confronting, seems to have acted in these months as this kind of merciless bullshit detector or lie detector, you know, where
wherever leaders or people for too long have indulged in or given a free pass to lies and wishful thinking. You know, coronavirus seems to have kind of been this incredible litmus test to detect those societies, and case numbers and very tragic death tolls in those countries. We all know the numbers at the top of the league tables. We all know the countries at the there seems to be an uncanny relationship between certain leaderships and incredibly high tolls. Even though it's the same virus we're all confronting, but it's a virus with no respect for wishful thinking, for lies. So that's the epilogue I would add in the months since. So, any questions? Or?
I have a question.
Sure.
I've had it said to me in many different ways that creatives, whether they're dancers or writers or artists, are often, again, like a litmus test of what's happening in a society. And I'm wondering if you would, even though you would say that you wrote this before Corona, it's obviously some kind of synchronicity. Would you call yourself a litmus test for that, or even an activist in your own way for writing about it? For what you found in the world?
I think that's a really wonderful question. I think that's the dream of creative people, which is that I think sometimes it comes that way around, where you immediately sense that the story that's come to you has this enormous kind of contemporary importance or wider importance. You just sense it. You just go, yes, this story right now, it just connects to that moment. But usually, particularly, I mean, for me, but I think for many others, that's the hope at the end of the story. You start out with something far vaguer. You start out with something that just intrigues you, or a magical seed, or a moment, just one image that intrigues you. And your hope is that as you go deeper with it, or as you enter it more deeply, that it will broaden out into a story that has a significance to more people than just you. It speaks to more people, or it speaks to your moment. It speaks to a wider moment that we all share. That's the dream. But the hope is that you in the beginning, all you're looking for is the first sniff of something that feels powerful and true, and could be the beginning of a project. And you hope that as you go deeper, this story will widen out and reflect something more profound that we are all sharing. So
just quite clever, because I don't want to be too pointed to get it.
Yeah. So, but that's the hope. Like sometimes it comes that we just hit. You're like, yes, this moment, this story, and you can feel it in writers. Like they've it's just come to them. Like I'm sure there will be a film or a novel around the corner that will just capture, the eeriness and the surreality of the lockdown we've all experienced and other countries are still experiencing. There'll be some story coming that some creative person in some field is writing right now. And they just know they've been gripped by something. But other times it starts with something that seems much smaller and more personal, and your hope is that it widens out and leads you somewhere that other people can come on board and feel connected to.
Can you pinpoint the seed for this story in your mind? You know what set you off on this path?
I think it was that idea that what if there was this promise of powers that spoke. So I think it came from two places. Like, I think especially in television and film culture, a lot of in the past 10, 15, 20 years, one of the things you have, I mean, you can't escape it if you go to the cinema, is superhero culture, superhero movies, and so over time, they have their influence on me as well. So I think there was, I've always seen myself as more of a kind of realist writer, and respectable literary fiction. But over time, watching them, has that influence. And I think part of the idea was, what if I could write a book that combined both kind of a superhero narrative, but of course, being me, it wouldn't be a superhero narrative that would lead you to somewhere ideal, where you could just, in an uncomplicated way, use your powers to do good. But the powers came at a price, and the powers had these dark puppet masters who were holding the strings, and the powers kind of in the beginning they promised wonderful things, but they actually took you, as with this young woman whose story I read out, that very quickly she goes to a very dark place where, you know, she literally treats another human being as a yo-yo, like, you know, to test out her powers. So I think that was the idea, that what if these powers were these very dark temptations, and then what you realize very soon in the book, in order to keep their powers, because you know you've been seduced by them, you received the teaser, right? In order to keep their powers, people do the most dreadful things or whatever their masters demand. And for me, that was very much. And at one point, watching the leaders that we have around us in many different countries, you know, that connected. So that thought of superpowers being given by dark kind of masters who then demand a terrible pound of flesh, connected to promises made by demagogues around the world, which initially seem energizing and empowering to the people that they're targeting, but very, very soon it becomes clear that you're signing all sorts of Faustian pacts in order to feel energized and spoken to. The main message is, you know, it creates narratives of us versus them. You know, I have things for you, but only if you promise to join me on my journey of hating them. As soon as we can get them out of the country, this country can be ours. You know, so that was another connection.
I immediately thought about, particularly recently, all the algorithm stuff and the facial recognition stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and the way that people get glued to the internet and end up buying things and going God knows where with various propaganda things.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, the book, one of the things that the book was trying to do is very much this, is kind of, especially in a country like India where religious life is this enormous dimension of life, both around us and, you know, the Saraswati Puja idols, but also inside people as a formative dimension inside them. I wanted to see what would happen if some regime were to achieve the ultimate dovetail, which is using kind of cutting-edge technology, or the promises of cutting-edge technology that learns you, knows you, predicts you, assists you, kind of, you know, like, you know, the uncanny things we've all faced, that you're on the phone talking about something, the next thing you know is Facebook or Google is sending you ads for that or whatever. We've all come across this. But that taken to its kind of logical extension, like an episode of Black Mirror. But in a country like India, where so many people are so open to religious suggestions and suggestibility, you know, religious narratives have such a powerful role. What if cutting-edge modern technology were to mix with the mythological promises of blessings from the gods? It came in that language. How potent would that combination be? And that's what the story is. You know, it's kind of like the most ancient promises that people have, you know, in a country like India, this pantheon of gods and goddesses to whom people pray in the hope of blessings. What if those blessings were to come to you in the form of cutting-edge technological implants that seem to know you better than you know yourself? So it was that coming together. Like, how potent would that be? Tapping into your deepest kind of cultural beginnings, but the most advanced technology, tapping into your deepest cultural memories and beginnings. So, which very scary kind of, but knowing exactly the deepest buttons to push. So.
About different kind of question. Do you feel driven to write very different things for each of your books?
Until this book I did, like, each book has been very different, and the new book, which I've just finished, the book after Shakti, I've just finished, is the first book that kind of carries on. I still felt there was a lot more to explore with where Shakti ends. So in a way it carries on. And the other thing I loved, and I kind of slightly embarrassed to admit, how much I love writing about, you know, the apparently supernatural. And giving myself that extra space to work, that extra kind of freedom, and what it brings out about my characters. So the book I've just finished, which I've just sent out to publishers, my publisher and an agent, is also has dimensions of the supernatural. However, there's a difference, and I'm not giving anything away when I say that here, in Shakti, the supernatural is soon revealed to be a tool of manipulation, whereas the new book goes slightly somewhere in a different direction, where it's certain people who discover that the supernatural comes from these powers that they discover come from an explosion of excess energy within themselves. Like, it's not from outside, it's not an implant, it's from within. And then what they do with it and how they curb it and how far they run with it and which direction they take it is what that's about. So that comes from people who've had very, very powerful experiences, and those experiences have almost acted the way in which, the guy who became the Hulk, his exposure to a radioactive field. Was it Bruce Banner? Yeah, so his exposure to a radioactive field but in this case, it's different forms, different, very powerful, often traumatic experiences that individuals have germinated within them, have grown within them, and then one day they find there's a part of them that can explode out. So, and they have these powers. So that's the new book. It's called The Crossers, because these are people who can leave themselves and cross. So.
Do you get much input from women stories, like from
Yeah, well, so
mother or
I mean, those readings are always kind of partly biased because they are incredibly supportive of my work as a whole. But they are my mother, my partner, and my dad as well are among my first readers, along with another friend. They're the first people I send out to see if the manuscript is making any sense. So, and then I do a second draft based on all their feedback, what helped them, what held them up. I'll just see the time. I was gonna, if there had been time, I think we're very close to the end, but if there had been, I would have read you a little bit more. But
It would be lovely to hear a little bit more. Just a little bit. It would be lovely to hear a little bit more.
Would you hear it?
Yes, you're a beautiful reader.
Oh.
If it ever becomes an ebook, please be the one that reads it.
Right. Well, what I'll do is talking about the bit where the second person's Shakti, how it comes alive for them and taps into their deepest beliefs in a God or goddess. I'll just read out that little bit to you. So this is the woman who works as a domestic help, and this is her discovering how she discovers her powers. Yeah. So it goes. Aruti lives in Narendrapur, 15 kilometers away from Shivani in Balagan. Shivani is the young girl. The two have never met. Aruti is a 38-year-old seamstress who supplements her income by cooking and cleaning each day in a couple of houses in Calcutta. Aruti's mother, Bandona, and her younger sister, Anjali, who works as a security guard at Quest Mall, which is where that food court picture was taken, also live with her, along with Anjali's 6-year-old son, Raja. Anjali separated from her husband a few months ago. Since closing time at the mall can often be after midnight, once the last patrons have left the multiplex and all the restaurants and bars, little Raja usually sleeps between his aunt and his grandma on the floor in the front room if his ma is on late duty. Early on Tuesday morning, 3 weeks ago, it would have been perhaps 11 hours after Shivani, in a different part of Calcutta, had proved to herself that she could hurl her maid's daughter down 5 floors without killing her. Aruti awoke at about 3, wanting a drink of water. But as she prepared to get up without waking her nephew next to her, or indeed her mother on the other side of the bedding, she realized he wasn't there. She stepped into the other room to see if Anjali had carried Raja over to her bed when she had come home. But no, Anjali was clearly sleeping by herself. Arati next walked around Anjali's bed to check the bathroom at the back of the house. But even in the dark, it was clear Raja wasn't in there. A now frightened Arati returned to the main room to check the front door and found it wasn't bolted. Anjali, when she came in at around 1:30, must have forgotten to use the higher bolt that was beyond Raja's reach. And now he'd got up and somehow slipped out. This had never happened before. Deciding not to wake the others just yet, even though her own heart was beating fast, Arati went outside to look for him. But Raja wasn't in the garden. So she walked out onto the road calling his name and continued as far as the pond, a few houses away. By now she was frantic. There was a well in their own garden for him to fall into, although it did have a wall all around, and Raja was reminded several times each day to keep away from it, and a couple of others nearby. There were obviously snakes in the undergrowth, as well as drunks who roamed the streets during these hours. And now this large pond, barely 100 meters away. She had to return immediately and wake up both Anjali and Ma, no matter how much worry it would cause them. And if, God forbid, they couldn't find Raja together, they would rouse one neighbor after another. Such were Arati's thoughts, and she had already turned around to go back when she heard a loud sucking sound coming from behind her. It was as though someone was draining a very big sink, which was in fact an accurate perception because when Arati looked, their large neighborhood pond was emptying right before her eyes, as if through a hole in its bed. Arati stood transfixed under the light of the nearly full moon, watching something she had never imagined possible, wondering for the first time since waking up if she was in fact asleep. Momentarily, she even forgot about Raja. When all the pond water had drained out, which happened incredibly quickly, she could see the great hole in the middle of the muddy bed. And next to it, as though that was its home, an even more frightening sight. A giant snake lying uncurled, hence the cover, by the way. A giant snake lying uncurled, its dimensions those of an adult python. Yet, at this strangest moment of the night, Arati didn't run, nor did she scream, because she was immediately certain who this was. Manasha, the sister of the king of serpents, to whom she had offered a puja just days before. And exactly as the many years of revering Manasha had led her to expect, Arati soon found there was nothing to fear, because Manasha, who remained far away in the middle of the pond, began speaking to her in the calmest of voices, answering all the questions within Arati that she hadn't even voiced. It was she who had drained the water. In fact, everything that had happened tonight was intended to enable this encounter. Arati's beloved Raja had never left her side and was safely asleep next to his grandmother even at this moment. Manasha had simply made him invisible to Arati for a while because she had a message for her that couldn't be delivered at any other time. Arati's devotion had pleased Manasha, and she was here to grant her two wishes. Anything that Arati sought, but she had to ask for them now. Arati bowed her head in absolute reverence to thank the goddess, because Manasha knew her mind so completely. There were exactly two things Arati ever prayed for: to learn the whereabouts of her husband and her daughter. Manusha replied in an unchanged voice, "Who do you want to see first? They are not in the same place." If ever the question had been presented to Arati before that night, she would have been certain of her reply. One choice represented love, the other absolute hatred. The hope of meeting her daughter again in some impossible way was what had kept her going through these endless dark years. Even now, she could change her mind and ask Manusha for her daughter and a small amount of wealth. Then her family would be complete. This was what her mother and sister, and most certainly Tuntuni herself, would want. Yet, for reasons unknown, Arati found herself asking her goddess with bowed head and joined hands to be taken first to Ramesh. That's her husband. So that's the, thank you. So that's the second woman discovering her power. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
Very, very
Thank
good.
you. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Grand, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks so much.
I was just going to say, we've got a couple of workshops.
Right.
And my wife actually put them on there. And we've been doing like Facebook Live interviews and you would that be something?
I would be honored and delighted. Absolutely.
Shall I give you my email? Or
Yeah,
give me
sure.
your email? Or
Sure, you can. You want me to give you mine?
Yeah, I do.
Sure.
Sometimes
Yeah.
a bit
Sure. So it's my name. So no worries. Please have a look. I'll spell out my name.